the ET Garage. As you can see, the block is back from the machine shop. So, let's get going on that. Let me move the camera around. As you can see, the block is back from the machine shop. It's all honed, new cam bearings put in. I got to do, it's starting to get a little surface rust on there, so I got to make sure I, not on the cylinders or the bearings or anything, but just between them in there. So I've got to make sure I get some WD-40 on that. One thing you want to do when you have your block machine, let the machinist know if you're not going to be using these plugs, like I'm going to be putting a knock sensor in on one side, and the other side will go the one of the water passages goes to the oil cooler that hooks to the oil filter, water-cooled oil cooler. So I forgot to tell him that. He put them in, so I had to put a little heat to them, take them out, and fortunately they came out easy. So you might want to let them know that when you do that. When you get it back, you want to, of course, inspect everything and all that stuff. I ain't going to go into detail engine building. There's a lot of good videos out there. There's people that are better at it than I am, or I should really say engine assembly, because that's what I'm doing. All the machine work was done at the machine shop. I just need to check clearances and all that stuff. And I wish I brought this in last night when I got home from the machine shop, because now I got to let it warm up and temperature stabilize so I can get the real exact it's easier to get. You want it as close to room temperature as possible when you check like your bores and pistons, or at least both of them the same temperature, so you get the proper clearances. I got to do that, and one of the first things I do after I get this all cleaned up and stuff is go over it. Is to one of the first things I do is put the cam in, but I'll probably go ahead and check the bores first and match the pistons to the bores and all that good stuff. Make sure they're correct, and then I'll go ahead, and there's a couple of things I got to do to those pistons before I put them in too. Now let me get going on this. Get back to you shortly, I guess. Alrighty, it is the next day. I was hoping to have this all together in one day, and then today start the installation process back in the car. It didn't happen. I just ran out of time, and I probably put in a good 12-14 hour day yesterday, and I probably spent a couple of hours on this right here, and I'll go over with you why here in a second. Let me move the camera, and this is no longer a 383 build. This is a 385, because that's what it is now. Let me move the camera and I'll show you. Alrighty. This is what I did. I had to modify the bolts. Now, it would have been a lot easier if I ordered the bolts. They have bolts that are, they're actually studs. And then you have they're long studs, and then you have two nuts. And you adjust the nuts up and down to the height you want, or either make a spacer. I'll go into that here in a second. But what I did was I took the factory OEM ones. I had a bunch of them I got off of eBay for a good price. And I just turned them down on a lathe, and I threaded them using a die. My die wore out, and I was able to completely thread the two that I used up front, and I needed to shorten those in order to clear the oil pan. And since the die wouldn't thread anymore, I wore it out. I got it as far down as I could on one of them, and then I made a spacer. And I have more room. This is where the pan comes up. And so I was able to do that in the back. Now, it's supposed to use 4 bolts, but with the dipstick, let me see if I can get that in there. The bolt would have been right in the way. So I had to notch this out and eliminate that bolt. And I'm not worried about it. I got plenty of clearance under there. This thing is super solid. It's a lot more solid than the factory one. And this thing is super strong and solid. It ain't moving at all. And the factory one only used 3 bolts. Of course, that was a short little one that went in the back here. So let me flip this over and I'll show you a few other things, I guess, before I get going again. Okay, I don't know if you can see this or not, but here's one of the pistons from the original 383 build. And you can see these sharp edges here on the cutouts for the valve reliefs. Basically what I did was I just rounded them out a little bit, take that sharp edge off. That's supposed to, I could have rounded them off a lot more, and that's supposed to actually help with flow. So that's something you may want to do. You don't necessarily have to. You can remove all these sharp edges if you want. Of course, do that with the pistons out of the engine. Also, I mentioned, I think in one of my earlier videos, I was going to go to flat top. I decided to go with exactly the same pistons, with same dish, and not bump the compression up anymore. Anything that might be just a little bit lower, it ain't going to be much. Maybe a point or so, because when I cleaned up the combustion chambers a little bit more, but still going to be close to the same thing, and that should be fine as far as I'm concerned. So let me rotate this over, and I will show you one other thing. Alrighty. On the front of the snout here, when you need to rotate this motor, once you get the things like the rings in, and then you should put the heads on and install the push rods and rocker arms, you're going to have all that extra, you're going to have the drag from the piston rings, and you're going to have the extra load of the valve springs, which actually make it a lot harder to turn it over. Right now it takes about 20 pounds of force to rotate this engine, and these are standard tension oil rings, which is about 20 pounds. Once I hook the heads up and the push rods and rocker arms in place, you have the extra load of the valve springs. And it takes a lot to crank this motor. Now they make a special tool that goes over the snout, so you can crank it over using a 1/2-inch breaker bar or whatever wrench you want to use. Or if you have a 32mm impact socket like this, it'll fit right over, no problem. And you can use that, and that's what I'm using. I actually had a homemade aluminum one somewhere, and I cannot find it, of course, now that I need it. And one thing I just realized when I cranked this motor over, I thought I had plenty of clearance, but I hear something hitting. So I'm going to have to raise this up, shim this up some. So it's a good thing I did that. Otherwise, I would have made one hell of a racket on startup. So let me get going on that. I need to, let me see, what other things do I need to do? I need to install the KC4 oil cooler. I need to remove that one plug above the oil filter for the oil temp sensor. I need to install the heads, push rods, rocker arms. One other thing, like when you have, like this is just a cheap Harbor Freight engine stand. Or actually, the way it bolts up to the back of the block, there's not enough clearance to put the one-piece seal assembly on. Well, it's bolted to the engine stand, so you have to unbolt it from the engine stand, put it on, and then bolt it back in the engine stand again. So that's something to keep in mind. If other engine stands might be stick further out, or I could modify that. But as often as I use it, I probably won't bother, and so it sticks out more. But anyway, let me get to work. I'm glad I rotated this. I thought I had enough clearance, and I thought I rotated it, but I guess not. So let me double check, see what's going on, and I'll probably have to raise this up some. So. Alrighty, I went ahead and made some spacers. I ended up having to machine them on my lathe, which is a good thing I have a lathe. I could have probably just used a bunch of washers and stacked them. These are better fitting. They fit better over that shoulder. And before I do anything else, before I put that back on, I already test fitted it and rotated it and everything's good. But before I go ahead and put it back on, I am going to go through and play it safe and retorque everything. just in case I missed something, since I was pretty tired pushing myself yesterday. So play it safe. I'm going to retorque all the connecting rods, and I'll redo the mains too, even though I'm 100% sure I torqued them all properly. I'll go ahead and do that again. Alrighty, I finally got the bottom end buttoned up, and I don't know if anyone noticed in the time-lapse video, I did not fill the oil filter with oil. Anytime you change an oil filter, you should do that if it's possible. Small block Chevys you can always do, because it faces basically straight up and down. The reason I'm not filling it is because I will be priming this motor, so I'm not worried about filling it. I will prime the motor once I get it in the car and ready to run. That's when I'll prime it. But for now, I got to get the harmonic balancer on, and then I have to get the heads on, push rods on, rockers are on, intake on, oh, the water pump, and I'll put the brackets on for the power steering, and I'll mount the power steering. That makes it easier putting it in the car rather than trying to bolt it up. Put the power steering pump on after the motor's in the car. I was able to get it out that way. I should be able to get it in. Bracket for the AC side, that I leave off, and that's because I got to snake the fuel lines through when I drop the motor in. And I'll go over something about that bracket and the water pump when I get to it. But for now, back to the time lapse. I'm going to get going and hopefully finish this up today. Alright, I'm getting ready to put the head bolts on. And one thing you gotta remember, different engines are different, so make sure you follow the instructions and find out as much as you can. Also, if you're using aftermarket bolts like ARP, you want to use their fastener assembly lube, ARP Ultra Torque. Usually if you buy new ones, they come with it. And it comes with a small tube, and it's actually plenty enough to do what you have to do. On a small block Chevy, these threads go into the water jacket. So you got to use thread sealant. I prefer Permatex number 2. That's my favorite. Most people, I think these days prefer that white Teflon stuff. I've never had a problem with Permatex number 2, so that's what I use. I'll use the Permatex number 2 on the threads, and then on the washer and around the head, we'll go the ARP Ultra Torque. My connecting rods, which are Eagle aftermarket, come with ARP bolts, and those use the Ultra Torque. Those go on the threads and the heads. So just whatever bolts you use, make sure you follow the recommendations. Usually, if they're factory bolts on a small block Chevy, they recommend 5W30 motor oil or something like that, or 30 weight motor oil. That's what I used on the main caps because those are the factory. So I just used regular 5W30 motor oil. Well, actually straight 30 weight. Same break-in oil that I'm using. So that's what I use there. I'm going to go ahead and sort these bolts out and get them, make sure they're cleaned. I cleaned them and wire wheeled them a long time ago. I'll probably just give them a good quick over though, and get them ready to go in the heads. All right, I went through and I prepped all my bolts. What I do is I apply all the ARP Ultra Torque to the heads of the bolts. Then I go ahead and I put the Permatex on as I'm putting the bolts in the head. Load that stuff up real good, more the better. I am going to torque it in 3 stages. If any engine building video you ever watched will tell you the same thing. Go online, you should be able to find one of these and print them out. If not, go buy your factory service manual. It'll have a diaphragm in there also. I found this one online, and it's me getting old in my eyes. This just makes it real easy. So I'm gonna go get the torque and those down. Rockers, push rods are installed, the heads are on. I ended up going and getting, I don't know if you've seen in the video, I went and got my better and longer torque wrench when I did the other head. And then I went back and made sure I marked all the bolts with paint as I torqued them. And I went back over this head, I forgot to do that. And this is a better torque wrench, and the longer it is, the easier. I put that head on with the short one that I had, and man, I was beat by the time I got done torquing 17 of these bolts to 70 foot-pounds. So anyway, I'm going to get on with the intake, the water pump, the brackets, and this sucker will be ready to go out in the car. I ain't going to put it in the car today. I'm too beat. I'll probably get it out to the garage, and then tomorrow all I have to do is drop it in and bolt it up. I make that sound so easy, it isn't. But anyway, let me get on with this. Okay, water pump's on, the intake is on, but I am letting the RTV, I'm not going to torque it down to the RTV sets, which is about an hour. So even though I'm not going to install this bracket until I get it out on the car, this is for the AC bracket on the passenger side. One thing you got to know, if you have installed an aftermarket water pump, doesn't matter if it's just an OEM replacement or not, make sure test fit, after you put it on, test fit your bracket and that it's flush with these bolts. So bolt here, and flush up against the head. When I originally installed this water pump, it was actually cocked a little bit. Let me see if I can move this camera a little better. Right here, when I originally installed it, there was a gap right there. See that? That should be flush. So something to keep in mind. If it isn't, what I did, you can usually grind it down. I can't remember where I had to grind it down. I'm pretty sure it was like right in this area here. Yeah, you can see where it's a little ground. There's a little casting sticking out, and it wouldn't allow this to seat flush against those bolts. And if I would have went and torqued this down, tightened it down, I almost guarantee this would have cracked. Every now and then you see on the Furums where their AC brackets crack, and I think that's what might be the causes. They had an aftermarket replacement water pump or an aftermarket one, and that's what caused it to crack. That's just my opinion, of course, but should test fit everything while you got the engine out if you can. It doesn't hurt. Usually only takes a few minutes to test fit things and make sure everything's right. So let me get going on what I'm doing. Getting pretty close there. Like I said, I gotta let the RTV set up. And one other thing I should show you, it has to do with the intake bolts. Hold on, let me move the camera. Okay, on the intake bolts, I believe it's these two here, or this one. One of these bolts or two bolts. I don't use the factory OEM bolts. I'm using these stainless steel Allen heads instead. But you have to be careful because the only other intake bolts will be longer. And what happens is they protrude into here, and they do have the possibility of hitting the push rod. I don't know if you can see here or not. Hopefully you can see, but you can see how close that push rod lines up with that bolt. So you have to be careful with that. Use a shorter bolt there. When you put your intake bolts, keep note of which ones are the shorter ones and put them back in the same place. All right, and also these get torqued different too. I believe it's these two here get torqued to 45, where the rest are 35. I'll have to look it up in the book, but always check your service manual. And that has to do, I believe, with the EGR port. Even though these heads don't have an EGR port on them, they come from the exhaust manifold on a 90L98. They still have the port left over from the older intake coming through here. So I believe that's the reason they want that 45. That's the only reason I can think of. All right, let me go finish this up. All right, I'm going to end the video here. There's still a few other things I got to bolt on. I got like the smog pipes and stuff I got to figure out to go to the air pump. I still run my air pump. People complain about that. That's because I have to pass a visual here in Pennsylvania. I keep my car registered year round. If I register it as a classic or something like that, I wouldn't have to have it inspected and I can get rid of it. But I leave it on. People don't like it. Too bad. Okay, so anyway, everybody have a great day and God bless.